Well, we're a little after 6:30, so I think it's time to call this meeting of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel to order. This is, as usual, a hybrid meeting. There are people here, there are also people online. Let me just ask a question to begin, because I've heard there may be, are there any here who intend to record this meeting? Jeanette? Could you identify who you are, please? Just so we... Was everyone able to hear that? She's from Woods WCAI, public radio based in Woods Hole. Thank you. Anyone else? Then let us proceed. The first item on the agenda is call to order and a roll call of the members. Why don't we start, as I often do, on the right, work around, and they'll then get to who is online. Dave?
Dave Noyes, Compliance Manager at Pilgrim Station.
John Moylan, Site Vice President, Pilgrim Station.
Kelly O'Brien, Local 269.
Mike Fortini, appointed by the Senate Minority Leader.
Mary Gatzlick, also appointed by the Minority Leader.
Jim Lampert, appointed by Speaker of the House.
Kevin Canty, Vice Chair of the Plymouth Select Board, Plymouth Select Board Representative.
Andrew Gottlieb, appointed by Governor Baker.
Mary Lampert, appointed by the Senate President.
Barry Potvin, I'm Chair of the Plymouth Board of Health, recently appointed by the President of the Senate.
And I'd point out that Barry, this is a new meeting. He was, as he just said, very recently appointed by the President of the Senate.
Jack Priest, representing the Commissioner for the Department of Public Health.
David Bryant, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
Seth Pickering from Mass DEP, and I'm here for the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs.
And whom do we have online?
No, Mary Waldron, Old Colony Planning Council.
Appointed by the Speaker of the House.
Desiree Callahan, appointed by the Secretary of EHS.
Greg Wade, representing the Department of Public Utilities.
I did not hear her. Is Jennifer Menard here tonight? She is recently appointed from the Secretary of Housing and Development. She's not here tonight, okay? Not online or in present. So how many does that give us, Mary? Great. We certainly have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is the previous minutes. And I am going to depart here somewhat from what we have done before. I do not plan to take comments or a vote on approving the minutes tonight, and let me tell you why. It's very clear that the minutes have and are likely for some time to form the basis of our annual report, which means they are becoming even more important than they have been in the past, which at least to me makes it even more important that they are complete and accurate. Taking comments here and attempting to put those into the minutes, and frankly having an approval here to submit them after I or whoever else does it writes it, but with nobody having the opportunity of the panel to review those minutes, strikes me as a procedure that we need to approve. So what I am going to propose to whoever my successor may be is, under the open meeting law, we have 3 meetings to approve the minutes. My suggestion to whoever my successor would be is that we receive the minutes as we have from the state in draft form. And this time we've actually received 2 sets because MEMA submitted some comments directly to the state that were incorporated in a set that was circulated to the panel members 2 or 3 days ago. Going forward, I would suggest that the panel be provided with copies of the draft minutes that have been prepared by the state, and then be given until sometime before the next meeting to really go over them, make sure they understand them, and suggest what needs to be done to change them to make them complete and accurate, with the goal at having at the next meeting, which here would be the meeting in March, a red line of what the state circulated with all of the suggested comments so that the panel can actually review and consider all of the changes that are made and actually see what we eventually approve. And for that reason, I am not going to ask for comments on the minutes, corrections on the minutes, or a vote on the minutes tonight.
We did motion to do that?
No.
Mr. Chair?
Say again, Pine?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to suggest that given that, which I agree with, I think the minutes are very dense and I wouldn't mind getting into them more. Can we move the vote for chair up to now to take up that space so that we can, so you don't have to be acting and we can get that over and done with without suffering the consequences of not reaching it?
No, the answer, unfortunately, Pine, I believe is no, we cannot. Once this has been published, my understanding under Robert's rule is it takes a 2/3 vote to rearrange the order of the minutes, the order of the agenda. I recommend against it. For my fundamental reason for doing so is that I think it makes far more sense to do as we did at the last meeting, to get what I would call the educational presentations. Our presenter, that was Dr. Buessler and Dr. Pina at the last meeting, Holtec, and the IWG taken care of first. Then I don't know what people, those people, or, and I'm thinking particularly of the outside presenters, or the people who are sitting here or online want to sit through and hear. They maybe have heard what they want to hear. So do as we did in the November meeting, keep what I would call the administrative and logistic items, the business part, that really concerns only the panel till the end. That's the way I've arranged the agenda, and that's the way I think is the better way to arrange the agenda, which is why I did what I did and why I retained it in this order. There were suggestions. I know I've talked to people who will to move it up. I just don't think that is the right thing to do for the people who are here, the people who are listening, or for the progress of the meeting.
Okay, I'm not trying to delay the meeting, I'm trying to move it along. So thank you.
You're welcome. The next item on the agenda is entitled Handicap Agenda. The reason I put that on the agenda was because, as you know, because you, at least all the panel members know, because we all received some emails talking about what should or should not be on the agenda. But before we get into that, Mary Gatzlick, I believe, has a motion that, unless I misunderstand it, seems to fall squarely into the agenda category.
It does. I would like to make a motion that we add a standing agenda item to each meeting entitled Planning for the Next Meeting, during which the NDCAP members can discuss potential topics, agenda items, and guest speakers for the upcoming meeting. And then the purpose of this motion will create a formalized space for discussing the next meeting's agenda during open meetings, ensuring compliance with the Massachusetts open meeting law. So we won't skate into that little gray zone that we skated into a couple of weeks ago.
As I understand the motion, it is that the chair, who will be setting the agenda, will be instructed to include on the agenda an item at which subjects for future consideration at future meetings can be discussed. There will be no decision as to what those might be, but the goal is to encourage thought and discussion of the things that the panel really should spend its time thinking about and working on. Is that a fair?
Not really.
Wait, I'm sorry. Correct me.
But that was good. My correction is that I would like to have the agenda set for the next meeting so that there's no surprises. I mean, guest speakers, most of the items we have on there are reoccurring, but it's the unknowns that you get when we get the agenda a week or so ahead of time. We don't have the opportunity because of the open meeting regulations to discuss it with anybody. So I would like to talk about the potential topics. And if we could decide on that time that, yeah, that's a good topic to add to the agenda, then we'll add it.
I have utterly no problem with a discussion of topics for the next meeting. I frankly don't think that we are in a position, I'll take an example, at this meeting, to decide what topics we should be talking about when we get to March. So if it's a instruction of the chair, we have a discussion on future topics, I would leave it to the chair as it's been left to the chair all the way along and is the procedure that we've been following, to listen to that and then to set the agenda for the next meeting that has to be posted some period of time before the meeting. But I could not agree to deciding 2 months in advance what the subjects will be at the next meeting. For example, I have received comments,
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
over the last few weeks from Mr. Priest and also Ms. Gatzlick that we clearly need sometime in the near future to take another hard look and make sure that people understanding what the deliberation requirements of the open meeting law is. That needs to be done, whether it needs to be done at the next meeting or some meeting shortly after that, I don't know, and I wouldn't attempt to decide tonight.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that Mary's motion was seconded, so we need to vote on that motion.
Is there any, we do need to vote on that motion, but I believe we're permitted discussion on that motion, so I would ask if anyone on the panel has anything to say with this respect. Let's start off there. Mrs. Lampert?
Yes. I agree with Jim, no surprise, but flexibility is very important. And because we are not meeting, as originally was the case, on a monthly basis, but every other month, therefore, it's important, I think, to allow for flexibility and not lock yourself in 2 months early.
Dr. Potvin.
Having served as the chair or vice chair of the Plymouth Board of Health for now 7 years, I think there's a misunderstanding about the role of the chair. The chair, I was told, has the sole authority to determine the agenda. Routinely, at least for the Board of Health, I routinely ask the head of the Department of Public Health to join me in agenda meetings, usually 5 days before the meeting is to be held. And at the Board of Health meeting prior to the next meeting, I always ask anyone who wishes to request agenda items be included in the next meeting to do so. So I think that's, I guess Kevin Canty could comment on how the select board does it in Plymouth, but that's how the Board of Health operates.
Mr. Caddy?
So since it was asked, the select board agenda in Plymouth is set by the chair and the town manager under our procedural rules for the select board. However, this panel has a tendency to talk amongst each other, not all members, but some members to talk amongst each other via email in ways that would violate the open meeting law on a not every meeting basis, but it's often enough that it's concerning. So I think this is also a panel of folks that are made up of with varying perspectives, viewpoints, and roles that they're bringing to the panel. So I do think in this instance, having the panel have input on what the panel is going to discuss at a future meeting, because if a majority of the panel doesn't want to discuss something, why would we subject ourselves to discussing that thing? Obviously, if an emergency came up that we needed to address, that's within the purview of the handicap, I think that could be added without violating what Ms. Gatzlick is suggesting. But I do think it could help us avoid further open meeting law violations and be a good use of our time.
Any other comments from the panel?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Having served in the capacity of trying to figure out how to run a meeting for a couple of years and how frustrating it can be, I really agree with both what Mr. Canty has just said and with Mary's proposal. I only wouldn't lock us into the agenda based on that discussion. I would say that it's an opportunity for all of the panel to propose what they think our next steps should be. It's impossible to cover everything that needs to be discussed in one meeting, but based on whatever the waterfall is, what Holtec is doing in terms of the decommissioning, what we need to address in order to advance decommissioning, I think is really important. And frankly, I don't think we hear from the entire panel each meeting, and that would be of value. That's not saying the chair should not meet with the vice chair and any other members of the panel in order to establish the meeting and get the resources we need for those issues. It just means that there's more collective involvement and engagement in setting the agenda than has gone on in the past. And I think it would be extremely useful for the panel to do so.
Mr. Chair, I was wondering if,
Mr. Gottlieb.
Mary, would you entertain an amendment or make an amendment to say the chair has discretion to add items after the vote of the committee, just so that there's some clarity that the committee's deliberations will set the bulk of the agenda. If something urgent or exigent occurs, the chair has the ability to add it, even subject to ratification by the body when we next meet, just to try and move this along.
Yeah, if it was urgent, I would have no issue with it, but it was like, hey, this would be a great idea after we talked, and it comes from the left field, that we didn't have an opportunity to look at it or discuss it amongst ourselves. I would have a problem with that, but if it's something emergent, no issue whatsoever about adjusting
If you'd
it.
amend your motion, I'd amend my second.
Can I make a comment on your amendment? Urgent is in the eye of the beholder. And so I would take another thought on how to phrase it.
Then I would suggest that the motion stands as read into the minutes, and then the new chair can decide what he wants to, if he wants to add anything to it.
I am not clear that much of the discussion here reflects the motion that that is on the floor. The motion was to add a standing agenda item entitled Planning for Next Meeting, during which the NDCAP members can discuss potential topics, agenda items, and guest speakers for the upcoming meeting. That, as read, is a motion, is provide for an agenda item to talk about things we should be talking about and listening to at future meetings. I do not understand this motion to say that that group, or they're in that planning for the next meeting, would set any agenda for the next meeting. I am in complete accord with the idea, as expressed by Ms. Dubois, that this could be a very useful exercise to have a discussion about what we should be thinking about. But as I understand this motion, that is all that is before us now. The motion does not in any way say this group in that planning for next meeting sets any agenda.
Okay, when you put it that way, I can agree with you, but it's very frustrating for some of us to feel like we're being left out of planning the agenda when we get something and like, this is what you're going to listen to. We get blindsided. So if it goes as read and how you understand it currently, I have no problem with it. I think it's a good motion. And it gives us an opportunity to have an inclusive discussion that does not go on, so it doesn't go on outside of the open meeting. That's my big concern.
I agree with you, with Mr. Caddy, and with my discussions I've had actually with both of you in the past, that people do need to pay serious attention not to deliberate outside of this meeting. That's right. The motion as proposed would hopefully provide the capacity and the ability to deliberate, as Pine put it, on the things that we ought to be talking about, we ought to be thinking about. And that I would wholeheartedly support.
Well, let's take a vote on that.
May we take a vote? Are we ready for a vote on the motion?
Yes.
Do you want me to check it?
Let's all check it.
Okay.
I want 3 people counting all of this. Okay. Mr. Noyes?
Yes.
Mr. Moylan?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Bois?
Yes.
Mr. Fortini?
Yes.
Mr. Canty?
Yes.
Mr. Nichols? Mrs. Lampert?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Mr. Pickering?
Yes.
Mr. Slocum? Mr. Bryant?
Yes.
Dr. Potvin?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
Have I missed anyone?
You and me, buddy.
Hmm?
I'm a yes.
I've got you down as yes.
Oh, you didn't ask. How
Yes,
about
I did.
you?
I will vote yes.
Okay, so that is.
Mr. Chairman, you forgot myself and Gregory Wade. I vote yes.
I apologize for that. Let me make sure I get you on my vote list. Okay. Callahan and Mr. Wade. I've got to
Yes.
keep this list up to date.
I vote yes as well. And just to clarify, I think you may have called Slocum, and if that's John Slocum.
You know what? I didn't make that change on this list. That's my mistake. Mary, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Mr. Fortini, did you vote yes?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I have 17 yeses.
Yes.
Yep.
The motion passes. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Jim, I think you called Mr. Nichols, and I think he's resigned, isn't he?
Yeah, that's a mistake, I think. That probably should be Ms. Madden, who is not here tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pine. All right, the next item on the agenda is Dr. Thompson. A couple of weeks ago, Mariette Gatzlick asked me, and I'm sure it's absolutely a question that needs to be answered. Who is Dr. Thompson, and what are his qualifications? Well, Dr. Gordon Thompson is now standing at the podium. Briefly, and I mean briefly because his resume is something I don't want to go through in detail, he received his undergraduate education in Australia and a PhD from Oxford University in the UK. For the past 40 years, he's been the executive director of the Institute for Resource and Security Studies. One of its basic programs is looking at minimizing the adverse effects of nuclear and other energy systems. For the last 20-plus years, he's been a senior research scientist at Clark University. I think it's fair to say that he's recognized by groups around the world as an expert in risk management as it relates to nuclear facilities. He's advised government agencies in both the U.S. and Europe, including the NRC, the DOE, and the U.S. Congress. The Massachusetts Attorney General has engaged him at least twice to provide them with reports, the Attorney General's office, about risk of spent nuclear fuel fire, perhaps at Pilgrim, and discussing the reports of the risk at Pilgrim Station and lessons to be learned from the Fukushima accident. Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, James. Can everyone hear me? As the chair told you, I've worked for entities including the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, providing technical analysis and expert testimony. Tonight I'm here representing only our institute, the Institute for Resource and Security Studies. There are some acronyms that I show on the screen that will recur during the rest of my presentation, and I won't read them out to you, but perhaps some of them are already familiar to you. This is a nuclear fuel assembly. It's a sectional representation, so we don't see the true dimensions. In fact, it's about 6 inches square and maybe 13 feet or so long. And this is for a boiling water reactor, which is what the Pilgrim reactor was. Another commonly used type of reactor is the pressurized water reactor, where the fuel assembly is somewhat different. There are long, thin tubes containing uranium oxide pellets, which undergo fission in a reactor. And as the months and years go by in a reactor, those pellets become intensely radioactive. And after a number of years, this object, this assembly, is discharged. And at that point, it is spent nuclear fuel. There's a fair amount of metal in this object. In the long cylindrical tubes I mentioned, and in channel boxes surrounding the outside. In the 1960s, a decision needed to be made about what metal should be used. One option was stainless steel, and that was used for pressurized water reactors quite successfully and was recognized then and since that stainless steel has some safety advantages. However, it also absorbs neutrons and thus decreases the power yield and the monetary yield from operating a reactor. So the decision was made to use zirconium metal. That has become a universal practice worldwide. It has considerable implications for risk because zirconium metal will react vigorously with air or steam, producing a lot of heat, and in the case of its reaction with steam, a lot of hydrogen. We'll see as this presentation goes on what some of the implications of this are. As I say, that decision was made in the 60s, and the Pilgrim reactor used entirely zirconium-clad fuel. There have been efforts in recent years to develop ceramic fuels in recognition of the risk issues arising from zirconium, but this has moved very slowly, and I don't see any sign of that becoming routinely used anytime soon. In the year 2011, 4 reactors in Japan suffered incidents arising from first an earthquake, followed shortly thereafter by a resulting tsunami. What we're looking at is Unit 4. There were 3 units not in the picture that were also affected. So 4 units were affected in this manner. 3 of them had reactor cores in place and were operating. This one, Unit 4, had its reactor core removed into its spent fuel pool. This picture tells quite a complicated story if you delve into it. I'll just touch on some highlights. Number 1, these reactors were built on a bluff. The power company decided that they needed to lower the elevation of the reactors in order to bring their seawater cooling pumps close to the water level, because the cost of pumping seawater high up to cool the plant would have an economic penalty. So for cost reasons, they excavated the site and lowered the elevation of these 4 reactors. They designed for a tsunami of 3 meters and experienced in the year 2011 a tsunami of roughly 14 meters. So here we have a case where an engineering decision was made for cost reasons and made these reactors vulnerable. We also see that there's been some sort of an incident here. In fact, there was a violent explosion of hydrogen gas. The hydrogen gas actually came from Unit 3 through ventilation ducts and arose from the reaction between zirconium metal and steam in Unit 3, which then exploded in Unit 4, creating the damage that you see. So here we have an instance where the choice of zirconium as a fuel metal made in the 1960s for cost reasons yields a result in terms of risk. If you look to the left of the unit, you'll see an object that is actually a concrete pumping truck. And it is pumping water through the broken top of that structure into a spent fuel pool. And I should just remind you, if I've forgotten already, that the Pilgrim reactor was very similar to these units, units 1 through 4 at Fukushima. The spent fuel pool had been racked to a high density so that it could accommodate a large inventory of spent fuel. That brings us to another engineering action based upon cost considerations. When these reactors and the Pilgrim reactor were built, the expectation was that spent fuel would be removed and the pools were, spent fuel pools were designed for quite a small capacity. When it became apparent that the fuel would not be removed, the pools were re-racked to a high density. The problem with that is that if water is lost from a high density pool, the zirconium metal, remember, will experience combustion with air or steam, liberating a large amount of radioactive material into the atmosphere. This was feared at the time, and hence the presence of the concrete pumping truck. Subsequent investigations show that this spent fuel pool came very close to experiencing a fire. It was saved essentially by sheer luck. In leakage from a crack produced in the earthquake. Had this spent fuel pool experienced a fire, the release from the Fukushima incident would have been much greater than it was otherwise. Now, speaking to the question of the wisdom of high-density storage of spent fuel, in the years 1978 and 1979, I was part of a scientific body commissioned by a state government in Germany to look at the design of a proposed nuclear facility. In the spring of 1979, we provided our results in testimony before state government officials. And part of our testimony was to the effect that high-density storage of spent fuel is excessively dangerous and should not be permitted. Within weeks, that committee accepted that position and ruled that high-density storage of spent fuel was not permissible. As a result, the German nuclear industry accepted that ruling and switched to dry storage instead of high-density pool storage. And utilities in the United States were asked repeatedly by numerous entities to follow that practice and eliminate high-density storage of spent fuel. On the two occasions your chairman mentioned, I worked for the Massachusetts Attorney General as a technical analyst and expert witness, making that case. The utility company declined. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission agreed with them, and Pilgrim operated in all of its latter years with high-density storage of spent fuel, exactly like appears in Fukushima. However, once the plant was shut down, the Pilgrim plant was shut down in the year 2019, very quickly the fuel in the pool was removed and placed in dry storage, just as the Attorney General and other parties had been arguing all along, thereby demonstrating that this step could have been taken at any time. And this is where the spent fuel is now. There are 60-some cylinders containing spent nuclear fuel, roughly 4,000 spent fuel assemblies. And this is an independent spent fuel storage installation. So by this stage, the risk of a spent fuel pool fire has disappeared at the Pilgrim plant, and the citizens of Massachusetts are very fortunate in that respect. No thanks to either the utility company or the NRC, just the sheer passage of time and the shutting down of the reactor. Now, for how long will this spent fuel remain in this asphyxie? The licensee, Holtec, currently predicts that it will be there until the year 2062. And looking back to the year 1982, we see that the Congress passed an act which was intended to create a repository for spent nuclear fuel, an underground repository. As of today, the United States has no credible program to develop such a repository. There's a long story about why that is so. It's a subject I've studied, and I can speak to it if necessary. There have been proposals over the years to transfer spent nuclear fuel to other sites. There are proposals of that nature on the table right now. There have been previous proposals. It has not actually happened to date. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has stated in its environmental impact statement that spent fuel could remain at isfices such as Pilgrim indefinitely. They assume, however, that these isfices will be rebuilt at 100-year intervals, which would require the use of a dry transfer system, otherwise known as a hot cell. There is at Pilgrim at present no such hot cell. We saw these concrete cylinders, and this is a cross-section. This is very similar to what exists at Pilgrim. In the center are 68 fuel assemblies surrounded by a stainless steel object called a multi-purpose canister. If you look carefully, you'll see that that canister has a thick top and a thick bottom and quite thin sidewalls. The sidewalls are roughly half an inch thick. The reason for that is so that the decay heat in the fuel can be removed by air cooling. Surrounding that canister is a small air gap, and then surrounding that is a steel and concrete shell. It has inner and outer steel cylinders with concrete in between. And there are air ducts, you'll see at the bottom and at the top. So cooling air travels naturally by thermal convection around the outside of this canister. The canisters are sealed, they're welded shut, they're sealed, and they cannot be accessed other than by cutting them open. There is an alternative which is used in Germany and Switzerland and elsewhere, which is the monolithic cask. This has a thick wall, maybe 10 inches, they vary. It has a lid that can be removed. You can also monitor the gas inside the cask. And this was preferred by the countries that I've mentioned and some others. In Switzerland, not only did they use casks of this nature, but they placed them in a building. And I hope that you can read the designation cask storage hall, which is where the casks are stored in that building. There is also in the upper portion a designation of a hot cell. That is equivalent to the dry transfer system that the NRC says will be built 100 years from now when it is needed. This facility, in addition to holding spent nuclear fuel, does hold some other radioactive wastes. This is the cask storage hall, and you'll see the large monolithic casks that I mentioned. This configuration offers opportunities to reduce risk considerably below the level of the Pilgrim isfici. It allows the exterior and the interior of the casks to be examined at any time. It allows a suspect cask to be taken to a hot cell at any time, opened up, and its interior and the fuel examined. The building itself provides some protection against natural events and attack, and there are also opportunities in such a building to add supplemental protective measures such as foam or deposition of sand from the roof. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission reached definitive findings about spent fuel in this document published in 2014. It's a very thick and complex document, and numerous people issued lengthy comments upon it, and some of those are written by myself. Turning now to risk. This is a portrayal of risk in the context of commercial aviation. I don't want to dwell on it because that's not our subject now, except to say that we're dealing here with data. We have actual data of experience with fatal accidents and with air travel. So that with these data, we can perform scientific analyses, statistical analyses, and we can do science with these numbers because they're real. The NRC document I described addresses risk in a different manner that I'd call ideology. And one manifestation of it being ideology is that they take a hazard, and this hazard could be attributable to an engineering decision made on cost that in retrospect might not be a terribly wise decision, but nevertheless, decision is made, an object is built, and then it's discovered that something very unpleasant can occur as a result of this engineering decision. That's rather awkward. However, if one sharpens one's pencil and has some private, non-public discussions, one can say, oh, never mind, the probability is extremely low, and yes, the hazard is severe and the outcome would be extremely unpleasant, but not to worry, the probability is low and is therefore acceptable. This, in my view, is not science. It is ideology, but it is the preferred mode of addressing risk by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There are three categories of risk that I believe are salient for the Pilgrim asphyxie: radiological proliferation and program. In brief, the first is to do with harmful effects of radiation, the second is diversion of material for weapons use, and the third is some deviation from the intention of the creators and operators. At the Pilgrim asphyxie, there are numerous possible harmful events that could contribute to these risks, and I give examples in three categories: attack, accident, or neglect. And I'm not going to read them out, but I hope you can all see them. Neglect is a matter of particular concern at asphyxies such as Pilgrim because, as we've learned earlier, they might be there indefinitely. There are also possibilities of accident or attack. Turning now to the question of attack, I'd like to introduce you to an instrument of attack. And I'm going to give you a couple more slides. This example is from 1943, and infantry members of the Red Army carried this object and threw it by hand against Nazi tanks. This was a big army with millions of people, and I'm guessing there were millions of Red Army people who learned how to use these things, and probably millions of them were made. So a very common instrument of attack. Coming now to a more modern equivalent of this instrument, this is the year 2008. This is an event staged by the Raytheon Corporation where they invited a lot of press. Just behind the white pickup truck, you'll see a shape-charged device being positioned a few feet away from a concrete block, which is approximately 20 feet thick. You'll see targets behind the block put there with the expectation that a jet would penetrate. This is what actually happened. The jet penetrated almost through the 20-foot block, but created tensile stresses that blew it apart. Other tests into rock show that a device of this nature could drill a very neat 10 to 11-inch hole about 20 feet deep in rock. It's possible to download from the internet detailed design drawings for this device and instructions for building such a device at different scales. So the point of doing this is to say that at least one instrument of attack is very common and very well known and very well understood by large numbers of people around the world. Now, the radioactive material in these spent fuel pellets is quite diverse, but a particular isotope is prominent in risk analyses. That is cesium. The units here are millions of billions of becquerel. Some people are more familiar with the unit of a curie. Becquerel and Curie were actually colleagues, and they got a Nobel Prize together in 1903. But anyway, Becquerel won the race for the modern unit of radioactivity. You'll see that the release from Fukushima was thought to be in the 10 to 35 unit range, about 80% of which blew out to sea. Each MPC at Pilgrim has about 25. That's a reference case a few years from now. And my analyses say that a knowledgeable attacker could achieve a release of somewhere in the range of 5 to 25 of these units from the Pilgrim Asphyxie. I'm suggesting 10 to 50% release per canister and 2 canisters involved. For fairly obvious reasons, I'm not going to explain in detail just how this would be done. Suffice to say that it would use instruments that are extremely familiar, such as the shape charge I described. Now, what else is in this spent fuel? Plutonium, as you see in 1943, was extremely rare. That was the first ever human-made plutonium. A warhead in a national inventory now has about 3 or 4 kilos. An improvised nuclear device might have double that. And each MPC at Pilgrim has around 135 kilograms of this material. Interesting issue from the point of view of proliferation risk. Here are 2 reference incidents about the Pilgrim Asphyxie. One is what I call an MPC fire, and that could occur only from an attack, and it would involve combustion of the zirconium. The breach of the canister boundary need not be large, and the cesium release fraction would be as you see. The second is what I call an MPC blowdown that could occur from either attack, accident, or neglect, would not involve zirconium combustion, and would produce a considerably smaller release. A scenario that, among many that could possibly lead to a blowdown, would be after decades of neglect, a defect in an MPC is discovered and the repair is bungled, leading to this MPC blowdown result. This is the land contamination that occurred in the Fukushima area. Remember that 10 to 35 units were released, about 80% of it went to sea, so we're talking of 2 to 7 units fell on Japan. Approximately 150,000 people had to leave their homes. After 3 years, 80,000 of them still had not returned. The area of cleanup is approximately the area of Connecticut. As of 2018, the cumulative cost of the cleanup was $27 billion. And it's a very interesting place to visit. My wife and I visited there in 2016, and it's very interesting to stand in a village. In this case, it was 5 years after the event, and to see saplings and weeds growing out of the street and the pavements, and the houses and the shops just left untouched after 5 years. And in the main intersection, the traffic light is still turning from red to green and red to green 5 years later with not a single person inside. Interesting. Okay, we're getting near the end here. What are our options for reducing pilgrim asphyxia risk? And what could the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and local governments do about it? Remember that federal preemption gives Massachusetts and local governments very limited powers vis-a-vis nuclear facilities such as Pilgrim. One option is to take the spent fuel somewhere else. Our local options are confined to advocacy, re-establishing a credible program for a repository. Again, our options are limited to advocacy. Upgrading standards for site security, inspection of canisters, again, advocacy. Replacing the asphyxia with something better, such as the Swiss facility that I described briefly earlier. Again, our options are advocacy, except oversight could be added to that, particularly if there were a settlement agreement with the Commonwealth. The last option, however, is one where federal preemption does not apply. And that option is to establish an off-site program of civil defense supported by a perpetual trust fund. The federal government does not require such a thing for Pilgrim at present, but it does not have the power to stop it. Therefore, the Commonwealth and towns could establish such a program. Hence, there would be a combination of direct action and advocacy. Civil defense would include, among other factors, emergency planning. Here's some very brief points about how emergency planning in this case would differ from the emergency planning that occurred when the Pilgrim reactor was operating. The bottom line is particularly important because you see that there's mention of long-term neglect and atrophy of vigilance. Atrophy of vigilance is a very common and well-known and well-understood phenomenon that is highly likely at the Pilgrim asphyxia because it is likely to be there for a very long time. On a day-to-day basis, it does not appear to be doing anything. And there's a lot of reasons why people can lose interest in it and neglect it. And sadly, we have a great deal of experience in many fields of such atrophy of vigilance. And this is my final slide. I have a bunch of others that could come up in Q&A if necessary, but this is where I'm going to stop. And this is a long-term scenario question mark. I'm not predicting the future. This is a future that I find certainly plausible. In this scenario, the industry declines. The US government depletes the nuclear waste fund. Currently that holds, last I looked, $40 billion or so. It's not actually a trust fund. It's earmarked as part of the federal budget and easily depleted if the federal government experiences budget pressures. In this scenario, transfer to other sites does not succeed. No repository is developed. and therefore spent fuel remains at ISFISI sites. Licensees gradually reduce their expenditures on operating ISFISI as the NRC relaxes its regulation, and as a result, the ISFISIs gradually become degraded. Sadly, we have experience compatible with all of those outcomes. But, as I say, I'm not forecasting. If we follow this sequence, it is likely that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and local governments will become, eventually, the de facto custodians of this ISFISI. And if that occurs, it would have been helpful if, starting now, the Commonwealth or towns had established a civil defense program independent of the plant funded by a perpetual trust fund. So I'd welcome any questions.
Any questions from any panel members?
I have a couple. Dr. Thompson, when you were talking about the Fukushima accident, did you take into account all of the security orders that were in place for the United States nuclear facilities, the original security order, the B5B security order, which had Japan had those in place, they might not have had the devastation that you saw. You don't discuss that, and what troubles me is that by you saying this could happen with Pilgrim and not looking at the results of the security orders and the current protection in place with the ISFISI could be misleading to the general public. Do you care to would you care to
Certainly
respond to that?
good question. When I said this could, I'm not sure if I said it that way, that this could happen at Pilgrim, what I meant was that a spent fuel pool fire could have occurred at Pilgrim when the reactor was operating. The earthquake and tsunami risk is, as you know, much greater in Japan than it is in Massachusetts. After the attacks of September 2001, the NRC and the industry working together introduced some greater security measures to resist attack, and to intercept attackers, to resist attack, and to have what the Navy would call damage control. That's something that's very familiar in naval practice going back centuries. And measures were put in place for damage control subsequent to an attack. And those might have helped Japan, but I'm not sure that they would have been able to deal with this issue, which is the point that I mentioned, that the spent fuel pool at Unit 4 at Fukushima came very close to a fire. This was not known at the time, and it's not obvious to me that the damage control measures that had been put in place in the United States would have been able to address this problem.
Okay, are we talking about the B5B damage mitigation procedures that were, guidances that were in place, which accounted for a loss of large portions of the plant? And being able to get water on the pool, being able to shut down the plant. I mean, I know that I was in the time that this all happened, the NRC, we were talking with some NRC inspectors, and one of them said at the time that he went to Japan, and they had not, unfortunately because of the culture there, they refused to accept the guidance offered by the United States, because the United States offered all of this security stuff to the European countries, and they took it. And that's really, they didn't have these kind of mitigated measures in place when the tsunami happened. And after the tsunami happened, you had all the Fukushima modifications in place for the United States plants and the European plants. Am I correct in saying that?
Everything you say is correct in general terms. I'd point out, however, that the spent fuel pool fire issue arises from an engineering decision made to save money in the short term, and it created a hazard that is completely unnecessary. The spent fuel racks could have been operated at low density where no fire would occur, and the spent fuel could have been stored dry. And the government of Lower Saxony in Germany accepted this argument without hesitation in the spring of 1979 when we made it, and the German industry rapidly adjusted and acted accordingly. That, in my view, is a sound engineering response to the identification of a hazard. Trying to deal with this problem after the event through damage control measures is in, let me be patient, is not the most prudent practice of engineering, shall we say.
Okay, I understand it, but at least the United States had those guidances, those B5B guidances in place. The other question I have for you, if you'll just bear with me.
Sure.
You talked about the storage facility in Germany. It looks like an open hall. Do you know what the general dose is around all of those dry house storages inside the hall?
Let's bring this up. It's actually in Switzerland.
Okay, well, thank you. I stand corrected.
And no, I do not know. I don't have any information at present about.
Okay, that would be helpful to know, because to me that would be a bigger risk if you can breach the building and you've got a very high dose rate in there, then that would be a concern.
First up, these casks are designed to meet radiation standards applicable in the relevant countries. So these casks would be designed, to meet occupational exposure standards applicable to workers in Switzerland.
Okay, so it's similar to the United States.
And that would include workers going into this hall and inspecting the casks.
Okay.
Offhand, I don't know what those numbers are, but whatever they are in Switzerland, these casks are designed for it.
And one more question.
Sure.
Could we go back to the slide that shows the amount of cesium-137 release? You had it all in becquerels, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you right now, we've had this discussion as a panel. It's kind of hard to equate that to what we're used to seeing as dose measurements and curies and millirem per hour or rem per hour. So
Sure.
how can you make that? Because those are pretty scary numbers up there, and we would need to. I would like to see something
Okay.
more what we're in line of seeing in the United States.
Sure. Well, first of all, the curie and the becquerel are alternate ways of describing the rate of radioactive decay.
I understand that.
Well, might be helpful to the audience. The becquerel is 1 disintegration per second. The curie is an older unit. If I remember right, it's 3 times 10 to the 10 disintegrations. And as I'm a big fan of Marie Curie, but I think the becquerel is a better unit because it's 1 disintegration.
Just for an
per second.
example, I'm sorry, just for an example, the 85 p becquerels, what does
Yes.
that translate into, like curies or dose or anything like that?
Well, as I said, my memory is that a curie is 3.7, 10 to the 10 becquerels, something. Anyway, you could look it up. Whatever that is, you just multiply becquerels.
Okay.
On the dose question,
Gordon, can I just make
Yeah.
an observation? I have the same problem that Mary did.
Right.
Excuse me, I put my microphone on. I had the same problem that Mary did on what is the relationship between curies and PBSs. I ran a couple of Google searches, and I always will be careful on saying how much faith I put in their final numbers. My recollection is that one PBS, which is your basic unit of which he took 85, was in excess of 25,000 curies. Is that about right?
As I say, I'm not precisely remembering the number. I mean, as I say, I love Marie
Fine.
Curie, but I really don't have much time for the unit, frankly.
Yeah, fine, but I just wanted to know that I did try to do a little work to figure this out.
Hey, Jim, I think it's just useful, if you'd like me to do a math calculation later, I can do, but I think it's just useful to look at the scale, right?
Yeah.
So can you go back to that?
Okay, well, could I
slide?
get to the dose question? Question was
Sure.
asked about dose.
Yeah.
In order to have a dose affecting the public, all of those Curie releases were actual or potential releases into the atmosphere. And the cesium was carried downwind as small particles and deposited on the ground and other surfaces. And then the dose arises over time to people who live in these areas. So between the size of the release and the subsequent dose, there are many possible variations. What we're looking at here is modeling for an assumed release of 1,600 petabecquerels from spent fuel pools at the Peach Bottom station in Pennsylvania. And you'll see there are three colors there for deposition amounts, the amount of cesium deposited per square meter of land. And the middle one, the orange one, works out to roughly 5 millisieverts of dose per annum to people living a normal life in that area. The protection action guides promulgated by the Environmental Protection Agency call for relocation of populations exposed to 5 millisieverts per annum or above. Therefore, any persons living in any of the orange areas would be required to relocate, that is, leave their homes and go and live far away for some period of years, perhaps decades. This is a spent fuel pool fire. Fortunately, it's assumed, it hasn't happened. But you'll see that depending on the date of the release, the contaminated areas vary dramatically. So therefore, the connection between the size of the release and the eventual dose depends on many factors. Is that helpful?
I understand it completely.
Sure.
Mary, 5 millisieverts would be 500
What was that?
5 mil. Sorry.
Could you turn on your microphone,
Yes,
please?
5 millisieverts would be equivalent to 500 millirem.
Couldn't hear you.
5 millisieverts would be equivalent to 500 millirem.
May I make ask question spinning off what Mary asked? After 9/11, I know our governor at the time was Governor Swift, wanted to ban all aircraft flying over Pilgrim Station. Then she became aware that doing so would essentially cut down air traffic going, let's say, from Boston to Washington. So it never happened. She also wanted the state's armed guards with high-powered weapons to be along the site. That became politically unpopular. So what I am curious about is the impact of aircraft on a cask. We hear from the NRC, we hear from industry that they've done tests and showing that an aircraft would cause no harm, but there's no indication how much fuel was in the plane, what was in the mock cast. There's no information of what type of plane is the type of plane that could be used. So I have gone nearly blind trying to find information on this on the internet. So could you make a comment of what is the threat of aircraft on the Isthmus?
Okay. And I need to loop around to answer that. And you might not like my answer, so here goes. In 1993, attackers attacked the World Trade Center in New York. They put a vehicle bomb in the parking garage in the basement next to one of the vertical pillars. And they had in mind that this tower would fall over and hit the next tower and bring both of them down. Didn't happen. Bomb went off, building stood, no big deal. Those people were caught and imprisoned, but people of their persuasion came back in the year 2001, and they had a very different approach. They had large, soft-bodied objects, aluminum, soft-bodied objects containing large quantities of jet fuel. They put these high up into the buildings, and as we know, they produced exactly what they hoped to achieve. In other words, their instrument of attack was well matched to the target. In the same period, they attacked the Pentagon, and the damage achieved to the Pentagon was much less. And that reflects the different designs of the two structures. It's not clear to me that they fully understood the two structures, and maybe it was just sheer luck, but they did hit upon, in the case of the World Trade Center, they hit upon an instrument of attack that was very well matched to the target. Given more time, I could explain just how all that worked. But then we come to operating nuclear reactors, and they're being attacked. And it turns out an aircraft could be a well-matched instrument of attack on an operating nuclear power plant. Coming to the Isthmus, it turns out that it's not actually a well-matched instrument of attack, because the aircraft is a soft-bodied object. The only real hard parts in it are the turbine shafts and the landing gear, and most of it in engineering terms is, as I say, very soft. The fireball from the fuel is very impressive, but so an air attack on an Isthmus like 9/11 would be a very spectacular event. Lots of flame and noise and smoke. I would not expect that to be successful. It would be a bit of a fluke if it was successful, and that would involve perhaps a turbine shaft hitting head-on to a single cast. That's a comparatively low probability event. And there are modes of attack on this that are a much better match to the target. And for pretty obvious reasons, I'm not going to go into further detail.
No, actually, I like the answer because I have a large piece of property. I'm not interested in it being harmed.
Yes. So.
Are there any other questions from panel members? Dave.
Thank you. Doctor, I appreciate you being here. I just had a couple of questions. You talked about the Zirc fire reaction.
Yes.
Do you know what temperature zircaloy catches fire?
As I remember, the air zirconium reaction starts to run away about 1,000 Celsius. And the steam zirconium reactions in the sort of the same ballpark as I remember.
So several thousand, probably 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit or more.
I mean, you can do the Fahrenheit conversion, but
At
whatever.
least
whatever it comes out
2,600
to.
degrees Fahrenheit.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so you need to establish that temperature, sustained temperature, in order to create a fire in a mass of zirconium metal. And a fuel pellet doesn't have sufficient capacity to generate that much heat in a
Well,
storage cask, isn't
okay,
that correct?
It all depends what we're talking about. Okay. Here, I'm sorry. Here we're talking about a recently discharged core with quite a high decay heat in the uranium oxide pellets. There have been numerous studies by national laboratories and the National Academy of Sciences and independent scholars showing that loss of water from that pool would have led to ignition of the zirconium, probably first with steam from residual water and then shifting to an air zirconium reaction later. And the reason you could get to such high temperatures is that first on decay heat, as I said, you fairly recently discharged from the core. You've got these very long, slender fuel assemblies. So the aspect ratio of the void space in the assembly is very high ratio of length to diameter. Radiative heat transfer along such a void is quite ineffective. And therefore, the decay heat will be sufficient to bring the zirconium to ignition temperature of 1,000 or so degrees Celsius. This is no longer a question. It's been verified, as I said, by national laboratories and others, and tests. In the asphyxie, we're in a different situation. The decay heat is much lower. Water is not present because the MPC is helium backfilled, as you know. And my judgment is that a fire could only be initiated by attack. And I'm going to be very limited and cautious in what I say. The attacker would be conscious of the need to bring reactants into contact and the means of creating ignition. I won't say any more than that. In a private session, I can say a great deal more.
Okay, thank you. As severe and as tragic as the events of Fukushima were, how was their fuel stored? Did they have fuel stored in cask storage?
They, in units 1 through 4, they had high-density pool storage.
Yes, but
Compact,
didn't they also have close to 100 casks?
that is correct. They, in addition, they had some dry casks inside a building. As I recall, they were horizontal, and they were submerged by the tsunami, and they came through basically just fine.
So there was no damage to any of the fuel stored in cask storage at Fukushima?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And the discussion on shape charges,
Yes.
I find that fascinating, but my understanding is that you need direct access to the contact in order to be able to establish a shape charge. A shape charge isn't something that you could use as a projectile from a rocket launcher. It's something that you need to physically form around the structure in order to be able to ensure the impact is imparted on the target.
That is basically correct. The optimal arrangement of the shape charge is to have a standoff distance, not immediately in contact with the target material, but slightly held back from it. That allows the jet to fully form and gain momentum. There are many possible ways of bringing the device into contact with the target. The United States Army has, let me see if I can bring it up. Oh dear. Yeah. Anyway, no. One of my optional slides is from a handbook of the United States Army telling you how to use a shape charge for demolition purposes. People skilled in demolition of buildings and other structures routinely use shape charges, and they're very skilled at it. The Ukrainian forces currently are using drones. Thank you, Paul. Okay, these are properties of a shape charge used routinely by the United States Army, and this is a personal carried device placed against a target by the soldier carrying it. The Ukrainians, as we know, are fighting a very asymmetric battle against Russia. They have a drone production line, and they equip their drones with shape charges carried underneath. And there's a story in the New York Times quite recently watching this play out, where the drone is brought to the front of a Russian tank and hovers, and it's got a camera in it, positions itself just below a skirt in the tank, goes into the turret of the tank under the protective skirt, fires the shape charge and destroys the tank. This is used on a daily basis by Ukraine. So there's many possible ways a shape charge can be deployed.
Okay, again, thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Any other questions from members of... Any other questions from members of the panel? As we did last week, excuse me, Diane? I want to let Gordon and his wife and anyone else who basically doesn't want to listen to the rest of this meeting go home. Does any member of the public have a specific, and I mean specific, factual question? I don't want speeches. I don't want a long lead-in. If you have a simple, straightforward, factual question, I'll take it, but I'll close it off if it gets beyond that. Yes, sir.
How many people have been killed by cesium-137?
The question asked was how many people have been killed by cesium-137?
Yeah. A good question. It's not a simple one. The biggest release of cesium-137 into the environment occurred when nuclear weapons were tested in the atmosphere. That was described as fallout. That amount has dwarfed any amount released from the nuclear industry, including Chernobyl and Fukushima. So in human experience, that is our principal exposure to cesium-137. Then the question is, how many people died as a result? That turns out to be a complex question to answer And it relates to an issue in radiation biology called the linear no-threshold hypothesis. This is a scientifically prevailing hypothesis which says that no amount of radiation is benign, that radiation will continue to produce adverse health effects as you go down in dose in a linear manner down to zero dose. If that is true, and it remains a hypothesis, then we can calculate that some number of people died as a result of the weapons fallout. And this has been done, I'm not remembering the numbers. However, most of the deaths would be from cancer, and cancer is a naturally occurring illness. I think something like 20% of all fatalities are cancerous. And therefore, epidemiology cannot detect the cancers from fallout. It doesn't mean that they didn't happen. It means that they are undetectable by epidemiology. We're left with somewhat of a conundrum because this prevailing hypothesis of science says that a lot of people did die, but another arm of science, namely epidemiology, can't prove it. But that's the best we can do. Is that helpful?
Are you familiar with the Health and Physics Society that has put out a 21...
Excuse me, I think we're getting a little astray. Is any?
I'd like to hear his question. Well, I just...
Okay, focus your question, please.
No-threshold theory, I don't.
Let me correct. I believe I stated
And I
that,
believe
sir,
that the,
sir,
Health
you,
and
sir,
Physics
you've,
Society is questioning
sir,
that.
you have quoted me incorrectly. You said, I believe in the LNT. I don't believe I said any such thing. I said that the linear no-threshold hypothesis is the scientifically prevailing hypothesis. If you look at entities such as the National Academy of Sciences and their equivalent bodies around the world, there is at present a prevailing consensus in favor of the linear no-threshold hypothesis. There have been and are today qualified scientists who do not accept this hypothesis. I personally don't claim expertise in cellular effects of radiation that might resolve this one way or another. I'm just telling you the status of scientific consensus. And those who are critics of this hypothesis, Anthony Calabresi of UMass is a well-known critic, and Calabresi is a qualified...
Yeah, I wish he would come here and speak.
Excuse me.
Excuse me, Brian, let
He's
him
a
continue.
well-qualified scientist, and he disputes it, and as is his right and his duty as a scientist. As the years go by and research improves, he might turn out to have been correct. That's the way it is.
Next question. Brian, just state your name so we have it on the record.
I'm all set?
Could you, Brian Campbell, correct?
My name is Brian Campbell.
Yeah, I thought, just wanted to make clear we have it for the tapes.
My name is Brian Campbell Miller.
Right, I want to make sure the tape knows it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, and state your name, please.
You can come here.
My name is Michelle Hatfield. My question is about the design of the casks. If you could discuss the role that the helium, the backfilled helium plays, And should that helium escape, what the effect would be, and to what extent is the helium being monitored, or should it be monitored for the future?
The Pilgrim canisters, as I stated, are stainless steel, welded shut, closed, and when they are being closed, they are dried out to remove water and backfilled with helium. That is intended to reduce or eliminate the possibility of corrosion of the fuel held inside. To my knowledge, there's no way of knowing if the helium leaks because there is no way of monitoring the interior of the cask. The monolithic casks I described as used in Switzerland, etc., do allow internal monitoring, so the pressure of the helium could be tested at any time, and a sample of the helium could be taken and tested to determine if there's any leakage of radioactivity from the fuel. If the helium were to leak, that's not a public health risk because it's a fairly benign substance. Is that helpful?
Would it have an effect on the materials?
If a cask leaked, then, and we're talking decades, potentially many decades, it's likely that there'd be some penetration of air and moisture leading to corrosion inside the cask. And that's why, in my opinion, having an unmonitored cask interior is not a sound practice.
Next question was? Yes, sir, you state your name? And move the mic so people can hear you, please. And Diane, if you're going to be, I think you're the last, if you want to be ready.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Lecce. I do have a question about the radioactive isotopes. Have any other isotopes been taken into consideration other than cesium-137?
Okay. Excellent question. Both the Chernobyl accident and the Fukushima accident released, shall we say, a radioactive soup. The reason for the focus on cesium-137 is for a couple reasons. One is cesium is quite a volatile element. It's released, its boiling point in elemental form is around 700 Celsius, and as an iodate or an hydroxide, it's not a lot higher, so it's quite readily released in the event of an incident. Its decay chain has a very strong gamma radiation in it. Its 30-year half-life is kind of a match with the human life expectancy. So you put these factors together and you find that the human dose, radiation dose attributable to Chernobyl and Fukushima is predominantly from cesium-137. And that is why you'll see again and again in the risk literature, it is the focus. But in reality, it is part of a soup. Is that helpful?
That's somewhat of a better explanation.
Sure.
Diane, I think you're last.
Question for you, yes. I have a question regarding...
Name for the record.
Diane Turco. I have a question regarding security. What would you recommend for a security zone around the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station? Because right now, they have a gate that goes you can drive right up to the pad. They're open. The gate says, no trespassing, deadly force used. You can go up there and just like your
Diane,
photograph.
the question, I think the simple question
just
is,
like
what would you recommend?
Yes. I'm just going to finish the sentence. Just like that photograph, you can drive up your car and be that close to those cans. So what would you recommend for a security zone around the pad?
Thank you, Diane. Good question. I need to give a bit of a roundabout answer, which I'm sorry I've done before. In my view, the storage of hazardous substances, such as spent nuclear fuel, for long periods should best be done through engineered structures and rely to the least extent possible on human oversight. And it's possible to design an engineered structure that would considerably reduce the radiological and proliferation risk posed by the Pilgrim Ispisi. That would cost some money, and at present I don't detect any willingness by the nuclear industry or the federal government to do such a thing. So then we're faced with a situation where the various engineered security measures have not been taken. So we have a relatively cheap setup that has within it inherent vulnerabilities by virtue of its cheapness, and that we seem to be stuck with that for the foreseeable future. The problem with having a guard force to deal with it is that, to be frank, this is an incredibly boring job, because years are going to go by with absolutely nothing happening, and it's going to be expensive, and realistically, I don't think the industry is going to tolerate years and years of paying high salaries to have a large guard force. And that's a problem. One possible way forward is to add engineered barriers to what's there now. And that could be as simple as big piles of gravel. I mean, at a very basic level, my understanding from aerial photographs is that the approach road to the Ispisi has the equivalent of a chicane, but it's a very, very feeble chicane. You can look up, Google what chicanes are, but what's there now, it strikes me as extremely limited. So there's options there, there's options, and it's very simple as big piles of gravel. I don't have a specific recommendation right now.
You have the slide with the option for safeguarding.
If we had the money and the political will to start over, we could look at this Villag facility in Sweden, and we could look at other facilities in Germany and elsewhere, and we could do a much, much better job of dramatically reducing the risk. That would be an engineered approach to risk management. And I don't know how many security staffs Villag has, but if a thing like that's done right, it doesn't need a big security staff. That's not the right way of dealing with an extremely long-term problem. I'm sorry. Off-site civil defense, yes. Thank you.
That's the slide.
You bet. I mean, thank you for reminding me. Okay, bottom row. That is something that the Commonwealth and the affected towns could do today. The NRC might complain, but they cannot stop it. The Commonwealth and the towns would have to find some source of revenue for it, but that would be a mode of risk reduction. That wouldn't stop a release. It would help to mitigate the effects thereof.
So you're talking about
The bottom row.
which is establishing a perpetual trust fund.
with a program of civil defense off-site, because, again, we're talking the Commonwealth and the towns, they do not have the legal right under federal preemption to do anything on the site. They do not have the ability to order the licensee to do anything, certainly to do with risk or in any way. But this is something they could do starting now.
Ms. Barnes, did you have?
Yes, Jeanette Barnes from WCAI. Just in this context, what would civil defense entail?
Great question. The next slide is about emergency planning, which would be a component of civil defense. There would be other components, and I should preface by saying that I haven't had a client yet who's come to me asking me to design such a program, so I'm sort of riffing a bit here. But in addition to emergency planning, one thing you'd have is long-term education about the public education about the asphyxie and about the risks that it poses. And experience in Fukushima, there and elsewhere, is quite illuminating in regard to the question of psychosocial stress. The affected population in Japan suffered very high levels of psychosocial stress during and after the accident, particularly the people who were required to relocate. The National Academy of Sciences has reviewed the Fukushima situation and concluded that it expects that a similar incident in the United States would also lead to high levels of psychosocial stress. And this can play out in physical somatic health, and it can play out in behaviors. One possible way of mitigating this issue is prior knowledge, so that people are not so shocked when it comes because they've been primed for it. So is that helpful?
Well, Gordon, Dr. Thompson, I can't thank you enough for taking the time and to listen to us. But as promised, I think if you now want to go get a drink or drive home or do something, it's clearly your prerogative to do so, and you certainly earned the opportunity. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, panel.
Thank you. Mr. Noyes?
It's already referred to her as his wife. He referred to her as his wife.
Smart town manager.
He's young. Is he younger? What's young? Is he better than your 15-year-old? Dave? Would you like me to let Seth go ahead while you're playing with this? Would you like me to let Seth go ahead while you're playing? Sure.
Thank God for the younger guy.
Nobody ever expected that stuff to be. Talk to him about the all hazards analysis. Exactly, yeah, in our training.
Excuse me, let's let Mr. Noyes go ahead.
All right, thank you. This is our NDCAP report on the current status of decommissioning activities at the plant. The first slide is our decommissioning waterfall chart that, as always, shows the major phases of the decommissioning activities. So specifically in the area of characterization, we are about to start with concrete sampling of the below grade, and that'll determine the ultimate disposition of that concrete material. In addition to that, we've just done ground penetrating radar to support some soil borings inside of the plant's industrial area, and soil borings and monitoring wells in the area outside of the industrial area, the area that was identified as Para 3. That will help us to complete the Phase 2 investigation and will culminate in the MCP Phase 2 report that will be submitted to Mass DEP in April of this year. With respect to the ISFC, we have met the conditions for closeout of restoration of the haul path, and we just continue with the monitoring activities at the ISFC, including the security measures that are in place for our dry cast storage. The rest of the swim lanes have their own individual slides, with the exception of site restoration, which will follow after completion of demolition of the on-site buildings. So for demolition activities that are currently ongoing, one of the structures at the site is the retube building. This was an adjunct to the turbine building. The design of the building was to support retubing the main condenser. So we had the condenser, when the plant operated, had Admiralty brass tubes originally. The retube building was to support changing out that condenser tube bundle, the tens of thousands of tubes that provided the heat transfer for the seawater to cool the steam. And that retube building, we have removed all the components from the building, including asbestos abatement, and radiological decontamination efforts are currently in progress. We also continue with removal of internal components within the augmented off-gas building, which provided for holdup and decay of short-lived radionuclides during the plant's operating period. We are continuing with the prompt alert notification system siren removals and have completed just over half. So 63 of the 113 sirens in the previous emergency planning zone have been removed. The remainder of them are scheduled to be completed by the end of the first quarter of this year. The demolition status drawing has not changed, so that light yellow block that's kind of in the middle left of the picture is the augmented off-gas building, and remaining for demolition are the reactor building and turbine building, that are scheduled in from 2033 to 2035. Reactor internal segmentation, the vessel internal segmentation has been completed. We are packaging the waste that is associated with that work. We are also removing the materials that we needed in order to be able to support this segmentation. So in the order of about 50 I-beams that were used to support the tooling that were part of the segmentation effort. Those are all being individually removed and packaged for shipment for disposal. So all that material is in the process of being removed. Later this quarter, probably by the middle of March, we would be ready to drain the reactor cavity and dryer separator pit to the Taurus, where that water will reside until we get to its final disposition option. On-site water volume update, so effective January 15th, estimating 868,000 gallons of water. That compares to 916,000 gallons that were reported at the last meeting. We do have heaters installed in the spent fuel pool. Those heaters were energized on the 4th of November, and they have been effective in maintaining the building temperatures above the point of any freezing pipes. Specifically during this last period of severe cold temperatures, we were able to keep the reactor building at approximately 60 degrees, as well as the area of the refueling floor, with a spent fuel water temperature at 87 degrees Fahrenheit. For site source term reduction or rad waste shipment, we completed 2024 having transported just under 40,000 cubic feet of radioactive waste volume that consisted of 96 curies of activity. In 2025 to date, 5,061 cubic feet with 23 curies of activity, bringing the project total to just under 300,000 cubic feet of waste material and just under 2,000 curies of activity. And that ends the report pending any questions.
I have a question. Let me ask you a hard question. So what percent of decommissioning
in what, overall?
Return in this, yeah, overall.
Couldn't hear the question.
The question was what percent of decommissioning?
What percent of the, so your swim chart, what percent
Yeah,
overall is completed?
I mean, it would be hard for me to assess with any accuracy. I know overall the waste volume that we calculated for radioactive waste to be shipped was on, I think, on the order of about 1.4 million cubic feet.
So my concern and concern of the that I've shared on the panel, and don't want to violate open meeting laws, so I'll say it in the panel meeting rather than an email. Vermont started their project about a year before, Vermont Yankee started their decommissioning project about a year before Pilgrim. And they reported recently they're about 80% complete through decommissioning. We've got another decade to get through the swim charts.
Yeah.
What are we doing to, communicate to the governor and try to get some leverage to get us back on track on getting this site decommissioned and the site restored and turned back over to the town? I mean, the presentation tonight was great. It was interesting, provided a lot of information, but we spent, an hour and a half before we even started talking about decommissioning and getting the plant.
Well, that is part of decommissioning.
I disagree.
Well,
I'm talking about what's sitting down on Rocky Hill Road, and it's still there, and it's going to be there for 10 more years.
Is it correct that a big issue in slowing things down was deposition of the contaminated wastewater.
That's Holtec's position. They're a
Isn't that-
process building, the turbine building. We haven't, I'd like to know when are we going to work on the turbine building, which is separate than the reactor building where the water's being stored.
It's a separate building, Jack, but it doesn't make sense to gear up for the industrial demolition of the turbine building, the actual structure of the turbine building, and not do the reactor building at the same time.
So you're saying they have to be done concurrently? They can't do sequentially while we're sitting
No,
here
they're-
waiting for litigation?
They're done sequentially, but it doesn't make sense to gear up and hire a workforce and train people and bring in the heavy material that's required to be able to do that, and then stop, and then put a 4 or 5 year pause into that before you can take down the reactor
Holtec could start that by saying, yeah, we agree that we're not going to put the water into the bay, that will transport the water off-site. Let's start tearing the building down.
So, I have a question.
Yes.
If the water disappeared tomorrow, how long would it take you to finish decontaminating and decommissioning the site?
I don't have the exact figure. We haven't gone back through the schedules, but the delay that we put into the initial schedule, 4 years of that delay was due to uncertainty associated with the water, and a portion of an additional 4 years was associated with that. So I would say that we would be able to probably pick up 4 years or more over our schedule in being able to pull that back in.
So you, at your discretion, would have the ability to reduce the time that the town of Plymouth is held hostage to that site by 4 to 6 years, if what I heard you just say is right. The original 4, some portion of it was because of the uncertainty you created with the appeal, and the other 4 was entirely that. So that's 4 to 6 years?
4 plus, yes.
Yeah, so you have that discretion if you chose to exercise it to accelerate the schedule by at least 4 years or possibly 6.
If we had certainty associated with the water, yes.
If you made a decision to adopt one of the other options available to you, that's another way to say that answer, right?
What are the other, is there
You
another
could ship it.
option that
You could
that-
do it.
that is
You could
available
do-
to us
you-
right now?
You know what the options are. You've evaluated them.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked to us about them. You could choose one of those options. You choose not to, and that's 4 to 6 years of toll on the town of Plymouth, right?
It's 4 to 6 years on everything. It's on Holtec and the decommissioning fund. It's on all of us citizens of the town of Plymouth, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's worth it financially, apparently, to
It's
run
not
this
strictly
out.
a financial decision.
Then what is it?
It's doing what's right.
How long do you estimate? Yeah. How long do you estimate it'll take to get rid of the water by evaporation?
I don't have
Well, give a try.
I wouldn't put a number on it.
Well,
If
do
the-
you expect it's going to be evaporated, gone by your current schedule of when you plan to start the deconstruction of the reactor, et cetera?
I don't know that.
I think once the water moves to the tourist, then that evaporative loss rate would be much less, wouldn't it? It's
Yes,
not in
it
an
would.
open pool.
Yeah.
So you're not going to evaporate it once it's moved to the tourist. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You're not going to be evaporating water once it's moved to the
No.
tourist.
When do you plan to move it to the Taurus?
The water that's in the dryer separator pit in the reactor cavity by the end of March of this year will be in the Taurus. What will remain on the refuel floor is the spent fuel pool inventory.
Mr. Gottlieb?
What's the volume of that?
Yeah.
Dave?
About 400,000 gallons.
Mr. Gottlieb, do you have another question?
A couple. Are you using the trust fund in the, to finance the appeal of the permit denial?
Yes.
What's your spending rate on that?
I don't know. I don't see that.
Has any assessment been done of the impact of that spending on the viability long-term viability of the trust fund?
Not the, oh, yes, yeah. The spend rate is continuously evaluated against the viability of the trust fund. There is no danger in being able to complete the work within the constraints of the trust fund.
And is that analysis available to the public?
No, it's not.
So we just take your word for it?
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned that the tube building, I forget what the term of art was, had a lot of asbestos in it, right?
Yes, the retube building, yes.
So given the past history of asbestos handling violations, what assurances can be offered to the public that we did not have a repeat of mishandling of asbestos?
We are, I would consider us to be in lockstep with Mass DEP regarding asbestos removal. We have bi-weekly phone calls with the asbestos portion of Mass DEP. They are regularly on site. They approve all of our plans. I believe that that the system that we have in place for being able to assess asbestos and use our contractors to remove it gives us the proper assurance that.
Was that the same process that was in place when you had the violation of
No, it
asbestos
was
handling?
not.
So we've learned from our mistakes?
Yes, we have.
Good.
I had just 3 quick questions. Actually, they're following up on Mr. Priest's. On your slide 5, you talk about removal of equipment from the DSP in cavity. When will that be completed?
We don't have a completion date for removal of, well, the material will be removed from the dryer separator pit and the reactor cavity prior to drain down, so by the end of the quarter. A lot of that material will still be staged in the spent fuel pool to be packaged and then be moved out of the spent fuel pool. That date has not yet been determined.
Your slide refers to removal of equipment.
Yes. That was the I-beams and the cutting tools.
And
the
when will
material.
that be completed?
That'll be completed prior to the drain down in the middle of March.
My second question relates to Mr. Priest's question of what percentage are you on the way through decommissioning? I believe I heard you say that your overall estimate at the beginning was at about 1.4 million cubic feet would have to be shipped.
Of waste material, yes.
To date, you have shipped over 5 years less than 300,000.
Yes.
That's my math's roughly right. That means that 80% of it remains to be shipped. Is that roughly correct? Less than 3.
Yeah, I would say probably 60 to 70% more than likely, but
if you were up to 300,000 out of 1.5 million, that would be 20%.
Yep. A lot of the material has been removed and it's being staged, awaiting for the specific transport design to be approved. So a lot of the work has been done in advance of the actual waste being shipped.
But you don't have any estimate as to how much of the work has been done relative to the overall job remaining
Not
to
an
be done.
overall estimate, no. I'm not prepared to speak to that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I think it would be useful, and I don't know if we're going to talk about agenda at this meeting, but an upcoming agenda, whether it's yourself or a different individual that's the chairperson, that we have a better, more in-depth review of that swim chart, because where I sit, I can't see that. I can't see the writing on that. Just to me, it's a colored, a colored diagram that doesn't give us an opportunity to dig into that and to challenge and ask for some more questions on that. So I'd suggest that, that's made as a handout available to us to look at, maybe with the agenda, so we can have a better, more in-depth discussion and be a little bit more challenging to Holtec on schedule and what's coming up next, like say, what's going to get worked on over the next 90 days, what's going to get worked on over the next 180 days.
Mr. Priest, I completely agree with you, and I hope whoever my replacement is will take you up on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one
Mr.
question. It's really a
Dr. Butler.
clarification for Dave. One of your slides said that there was 868,683 gallons of wastewater remaining
That's correct.
as of the 15th.
Yes.
Did I hear you also say the Taurus has a capacity of 400,000 gallons?
No, the spent fuel pool has a capacity of 400,000 gallons.
What is the capacity of the Taurus?
Is 1.6 million gallons.
And I assume you won't put the heaters into the Taurus.
We don't have any current plans to put heaters in the Taurus.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, just one follow-up. When you move the water into the Taurus, will you retain 400,000 gallons in the spent fuel pool so you can continue to heat the building?
We will maintain the water in the fuel pool in order to be able to continue to process the waste.
Thank you.
And that'll make it
and
available
will you
for us.
also use it for the purpose that you put out before to continue heat the?
We likely would, yes.
So Dave, that's the critical path on maintaining the volume in the spent fuel pool.
Maintaining the volume supports the two activities, the waste processing and continuing to heat the buildings through the
so it
winter.
is both.
Yes, it is both.
You said you did not have plans to, currently, to heat the water in the Taurus,
Right.
but you'd be capable to do it if you chose to.
We could, yes.
Yeah.
Does it mean, if you're going to maintain 400,000 gallons in the spent fuel pool, does that mean you're going to be taking water out of the Taurus to replace that which you've induced to evaporate to keep the building warm?
We would likely have to make up to the Taurus to maintain some level in the Taurus.
To maintain in the Taurus?
Your question was the spent.
Mine was the opposite. Mine is you're going to be taking water out of the Taurus to maintain, to replace the water that you're forcing to evaporate to do whatever.
Yes, yeah, that's where the water would come from. We wouldn't put new water into the spent fuel pool to maintain an inventory in the spent fuel pool.
Right, so the fact that water's going into the Taurus and that's going to evaporate less there is really not that dispositive in terms of the amount of water that's ultimately going to get evaporated, because you're going to keep adding more water back in to the spent fuel pool, right?
If the intent was to evaporate water, we would maintain heaters in the spent fuel pool and in the cavity, and we would evaporate the large surface area associated with both of those volumes, not just what's in the spent fuel pool. The spent fuel pool would only give us the ability to be able to evaporate what's in the surface area of the spent fuel pool.
Right, but that wouldn't let you pretend the fact that it's serving a process function when the intent is really just to evaporate it out, to a lot of us. So you're not doing it that way because it would give truth to the lie of what you're manipulating to do here, which is reduce that volume as much as possible during this period of manufactured uncertainty.
We are far from reducing this volume as much as possible. The temperature in the spent fuel pool is 85 degrees. We have the capability of heating that water to 125 degrees in the...
Right, but that would then reveal what you told us, which is you want to keep a warm worker environment. You don't want to sweat them out. So you have to keep it at a moderate level and not optimize it, which is perhaps why you're extending the lifetime of the appeal process as long as you are, because you can't maximize it, so you need to add years.
You've got an incredible imagination.
It doesn't take really, actually.
It adds up.
No, I've got a good detector, and it's not it doesn't take much imagination to see what's going on here.
Mr. Chair, I have a
It's blatantly
question.
obvious what's going on here.
Dave, I have a question. Prior to draining the water down into the Taurus, all the internals you cut out these last several months for removal, the residual left behind particles that were you're processing the water before you drain it down, or are you just going to?
Yeah, that's all being cleaned up. So we've maintained filtration right at the point at which we've done the cutting and separation, and we will do a thorough cleaning of the volume before the water's let down.
And then, so once you drain down into the Taurus, you have that open cavity of the reactor vessel itself, right? What do we do to maintain airborne so we don't have any issues with airborne contamination afterwards?
So we continue to monitor it as we go. We hydrolaze the surfaces of the walls as we go to maintain any contamination within the water, and we have the ability to be able to apply a fixative if we need to do that.
To be clear, what you're evaporating is not filtered. That's the difference between dumping in the bay that was going to go through a certain amount of filtration versus the evaporation.
It's not filtered once it's a gas, but the water is being continuously filtered in the spent fuel pool. It's being filtered at the point at which we perform activities. We've got tri-nuke filters in there. We have a demineralization and a filter system that is continually pulling water off of that spent fuel pool and circulating that through demineralizers and cleaning it up. So a lot of material is being removed from that water. That water is in fact being filtered before it evaporates.
What about the reactor floor?
What about it?
What about that water that's being evaporated?
The water from the cavity? Same thing. We have an Avantec system that is continually pulling water out of the cavity and dryer separator pit, filtering it to half a micron effective filter capability, and then returning it into that volume.
Excuse me, Dave, am I correct that the plan, if you're allowed to discharge water into the bay, is to treat that water before it is discharged?
Yes, yeah, we're required to by NRC
Are you
regulation.
treating the water that is being evaporated to the same degree?
I don't know whether it's treated to the same degree. It's demineralized. The water that's in the spent fuel pool goes through a demineralizer.
No, I realize
I've never
that.
done an assessment to determine. I know it meets all the NRC regulations. I know we measure everything that's in it, so we know what is being released.
Could you come back and tell us at a future meeting how the treatment, what is, in some detail, what you plan to do to treat the water you would discharge, and compare that to what you have been doing to treat the water that's evaporated?
Yep, we can do that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Priest.
No, it's,
Oh, I didn't hear you. Sorry, Jack, I didn't see you.
didn't have a question.
Okay. I don't mean Mr. Priest, I mean Mr. Pickering. Wait, you're both IWG.
Mr. Chairman, so we're running behind. I'm going to help with that, I hope. I have no prepared remarks tonight.
So what has the IWG done over the last 2 months?
We'd be giving you updates on stuff we've already given you updates on at least twice, maybe even 3 times.
To give us a sense, because frankly, I don't have one, what have the IWG been doing over the last 2 months?
I don't know, Jim, I'm not ready for that question tonight. I mean, we're talking about the stuff that's going on that has to do with the, the regulatory stuff that is just the asbestos stuff, the solid waste stuff that's coming up, the 21E stuff that's going on. Dave referenced that the Phase 2 report's going to be submitted soon. Stuff like that.
To get back to Mr. Priest, and I'll get the name right question this time, he referenced the need to do a great deal of work to advance this decommissioning process. What has the IWG done in the last 2 months to advance the decommissioning process?
What do you want them to do?
You know, if you don't know what you should do, how am I supposed to?
Change,
Well,
we brought,
we're actively engaged with the activities that are going on at the plant that are subject to our regulations.
Does the IWG do anything in the way of suggesting how the speed and effectiveness of the decommissioning might be improved?
I don't know how to answer that, Jim.
I'll walk out on the limb. Right? So we're engaged interagency-wise. We're working through some change in participants on that IWG. We've had some discussion about how can we be more effective in monitoring progress, and we're working through those changes now. A part of it is how can we better serve and interact with this panel, and how can we, influence isn't the right word, how can we have better discussions with this panel to move forward with our mission on getting the site cleaned up and restored in a timely manner.
Very glad to hear that. I think it's something the panel would look forward to. I think that's what we all on this panel hoped would happen when the IGWG was established, what now, 4 or 5 years ago? 4 or 5 years ago, and be overjoyed. I would personally be overjoyed, and I think most of the panel members would be if we started getting that type of reports, information. So frankly, we could provide input also.
Mr. Lambert, Pine Dubois has a question. She has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, Pine.
Mr. Lampert, I heard it from a rumor mill, or maybe he even told me the last time we were meeting that Mr. Seth Pickering may be retiring from his role. And I'm wondering, as he's standing there, if we could give him a round of applause and thank him for participating on this wonderful panel and helping us figure out asbestos and all kinds of air quality.
I think we very much should. I asked Mr. Pickering tonight, was tonight really going to be his last rodeo? And unfortunately, from our point of view, the answer is yes. Seth, thank you.
Thank you, Pine. Thank you, Jim.
Hey, and Seth, that doesn't mean you can get away from coming to the meetings, you know.
Well, it's my last meeting as a member of the panel. How's that?
Oh, yeah, though.
Okay.
Good luck.
So Jim, we're working on that. You know, I'm the spokesperson for the IWG here. I don't run it.
That I'm fully aware of.
So, you know, there are some changes that are coming that will probably start taking effect as of the next meeting. A little bit of a reorganization. So, you know, we share the same hopes that you do, you know. Want to get this decommissioning moving along.
All right.
Any other questions?
No more questions, but a great deal of thanks personally from me, and I'm sure from all of the other panel members.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
I did one more question for you, Seth. Who's going to be our contact maybe at DEP? Is there a go-to person should anything come up?
Yeah, that's going to be determined.
Can you send out something as soon as it is determined?
Well, I'm sure that somebody will. It won't be me.
Well, but you'll be sure they have our contacts, right?
You know, probably from.
Yeah, I've been told by the state, Pine, that they're still trying to figure out who that lucky person might be.
I don't doubt that. I just want to make sure they have our contacts so that we don't find out at the next.
I will
meeting.
make sure I get the contact information on to the next chair as to who at least has been giving me the information on that subject.
Yeah, you'll be notified. Yep. Okay. Great.
Very much so.
Thank you.
Again, thank you. That brings us to public comment and questions, and I've set aside 30 minutes for this because I always set aside 30 minutes for this. How many people want to speak? 1, 2, fine. I'm not going to give everybody 15 minutes, but if we could if you could say what you need to say in around 5, I'm sure we'd all appreciate it. But we have set aside 30. Mr. Campbell?
This should be about maybe 3 minutes or so.
Fine, I wasn't even pressing you on time.
Okay. As I said before.
Is your mic on?
Maybe, okay, thank you. Thank you, Seth. As I said before, my name is Brian Campbell, retired electrical engineer, and I strongly support discharging treated water from Pilgrim Nuclear Station into Cape Cod Bay. Holtec is also safely decommissioning Indian Point Nuclear in New York. Generation Atomic calculates that the water outside the plant, if one were to hypothetically consume it, they would need to drink approximately 80 gallons to equal the radiation dose received from eating a regular banana. This will be about the same for Pilgrim. The presentations by Holtec to this panel shows Holtec to be a good corporate citizen performing the Pilgrim decommissioning in a truthful and open manner that should be commended. 2024 November presentation of transport and fate of radioactive contaminants in and around Cape Cod Bay by Dr. Brusler and Dr. Ripiner of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. I don't know if I said their names right. Funded by taxpayer North Sea grant, was just more propaganda by a $263 million a year budget of, that's what WHOI, NGO, a member of the $2.3 billion a year anti-nuclear industrial complex. After Dr. Bressler's presentation, in the hallway as he was leaving, I informed Dr. Bressler that I asked Google AI Search Labs the following question: does Massachusetts allow for dilution of radioactive medical waste to be discharged into the sewage system? AI answered, yes, Massachusetts allows discharge of diluted radioactive liquid medical waste into the sanitary sewer system if the diluted radioactive liquid medical waste is not a alpha emitter, and tritium is a low-level beta emitter. Dr. Bressler answered that active nuclear power plants and medical isotopes provide economic and social value to society. Therefore, their low-level radioactive discharges should be allowed, while Pilgrim Nuclear is inactive, and Holtec should build a water storage tank to store tritiated water for 4 successive half cycles, or approximately 60 years. Paul Miller, in 2022, an article in Power magazine, Accelerated Decommissioning of Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, a progress report, reports social value in accelerated decommissioning will benefit the town of Plymouth by enabling the revenues lost when the plant was shut down. It could also benefit Holtec financially, since it would enable the company to collect monies remaining in the decommissioning trust fund. This right here is a good reason why the 1,600 acres that this plant sat on, right, should be used by Pilgrim by Plymouth to develop it and to tax it. So thank you for listening.
Hi. Thank you for having Dr. Thompson tonight. It was so powerful and such important information that the people need to understand. One thing I want to remind folks is that there is no insurance, homeowners insurance, if there is a radiological accident. There's nothing out there. Check your homeowners insurance. And I just want to say that Representative Michelle Badger and Representative Hattie Luddy have filed legislation for emergency planning around the nuclear waste dump here in Plymouth, so we're hoping that gets passed this year. It really needs to be done because right now there's really nothing. And I wanted to ask Mr. Moylan, I'd like to ask you a question. When Holtec came to Plymouth, they said that if there was a problem with the cask, that they would bring in a giant cask overpack to cover that canister that was damaged. And let me just read this here. Quote, "It's my personal belief it is not practical to repair a canister if it were damaged. If it had a through wall crack, first you prevent it, but in the most unlikely circumstance, if the canister were to develop a leak, let's be realistic. You have to find it, that crack, where it might be, and then find the means to repair it. You will have in the face of millions of curies of radioactivity coming out of the canister, and we think that's not a path forward." That's Dr. Chris Singh speaking to the San Onofre folks, talking about how he would not recommend fixing a can, even with a microscopic leak. With those 62 cans on the hill up there, with minimal security, how does Holtec plan to mitigate any kind of crack, leak, or damage?
Yeah, so the repair to a cask or putting it into a larger overpack would depend on the exact failure mechanism. So it's not a foregone conclusion that repair is not an option. It really depends on what type of a defect the canister might have. And that would dictate what the best way to be able to make the repair would be, whether it would be to encase it in a larger canister, or whether it would be to attempt to make a localized repair.
Does Holtec
Either
have a
one of
canister,
them-
a large canister on site?
I'm sorry?
Does Holtec have a large canister on site?
We do not, nor would we need one. This is not, the hypothesis of this is not a fast developing event. This is something that would be detected during inspection of the casks, and there would be time to be able to implement whatever we needed to.
As I understand, there's one giant cask that was made for Oyster Creek, and it is dedicated to Oyster Creek only. So if Holtec is saying they have a large cask to put over, that's not true. As far as I know, I read that in a report. And also, too, even Chris Singh says, your CEO, says that you can't repair these cans.
Right, and his comments were made based on the technology that was available at the time that he was addressing at San Onofre. There have been some advances with respect to repair, so it is an option. It depends on the type of defect. And the fact that the facility is owned by the company that would make the cask is a benefit in being able to obtain a cask if we
What if
needed
there was a
one.
quick rupture or something, an accident or an attack? How would Holtec handle that to prevent radiation leaking into our communities?
We would isolate the area. We would make sure that the way the casks are set up, the very low amount of helium that's in there, it's not going to create a projectile release of radioactivity.
How would you isolate a cask?
We would encase it.
What would you encase it with?
Well, we would isolate it. We would keep people away from it. In the event that we needed to, we would put an enclosure over it. We would establish a filtration system. We would do whatever we needed to do in an emergency situation.
So tomorrow, if there was an
prevent the
emergency, are
release
you
of that
ready to?
material.
Oh, I'm sorry. So tomorrow, if there was an emergency, you'd be able to manage that?
Yes.
Wow. You have a large canister. How would you get to the center ones anyways? They were pretty packed tightly. Those cans are pretty tightly packed. I've seen them.
Right. No, I understand that. Are you saying that there isn't room enough to be able to create an enclosure to lower over the top of the canister without hitting other canisters?
Yes. But you don't have anything here, so that's the point, I think, is Holtec really does not have a plan to mitigate any problems with the cans. If somebody decided to blow one of those up, we're all on our own. Thank you.
Could you provide the information to us on what you referred to as there has been a advanced technology to deal with a crack, where Dr. Singh had said, as Diane mentioned, out in San Onofre, that no, there was no way to fix a crack canister because you would be introducing a vulnerable area that would be that could be affected by corrosion. So could you provide that information? Because we'd like to hear the good news that there is something.
I don't have specific access.
Well, could you give us links? Is there anything on Holtec's website? I mean, you didn't dream this up, I'm sure.
No.
So could you send us links so we can read about it? You should want to spread good news. Or we'd be thinking we didn't hear it, so therefore it doesn't exist. Could you do that? Yes? No? Maybe so.
I can provide you what information would be publicly available along that line, yes.
Hey, that'd be great. Thank you.
I have one further question for Dave. Just a clarification on inspections of the canisters. The NRC, I believe, requires an inspection after the first 20 years. Is that correct?
It's after the first 20 years of the license being active for the plant. So for us, it comes due in 2034.
And at that time, I believe the NRC only requires one canister to be inspected?
It depends. There's a sampling, there's a specific criteria that determine how many have to be inspected and to what extent.
Mr. Chairman, we have one more person like to speak. Okay. He's been waiting a long time.
Go ahead, I'm not in a rush. Go ahead, you're here. Yeah, go ahead. So I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Philip Crawford. I'm the site manager for Champion. I've been in the power industry since I was 18 years old, decommissioning for the last 4 years. I've done the dry cast storage. Been doing that for about 15 years. So I just want to introduce myself. I obviously support the decommissioning efforts, and I'll be around here in Plymouth. Enjoy the town. Enjoy this open forum. I think this is awesome, right? We can ask the hard questions. We can talk to each other, and then we can smile and just be in our position. So I just wanted to put my face out there. Enjoy being here. I think the people here are great, but I do support decommissioning, have intimate knowledge of it. Not as good as Dave or Mr. Mullen, obviously, but I'm looking forward to interacting with y'all. So thank you.
Could you just tell me who's Champion?
We're the preferred service provider for decommissioning for Holtec.
And providing what, just so I've got a better feel?
Just the deconstruction activities, right? So we in Central take things apart.
So you're basically taking down all these buildings and cleaning out the pools, et cetera?
Yes, sir. We're one of the companies.
Great.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just
All right.
wanted to
Thank you.
feel.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Rothstein, I believe you're sitting out there somewhere waiting.
I can't unmute him. No, he's here. I don't have the capability of muting him. Yes, mute himself.
You've got to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Okay. Guess we move on.
All right, that's it.
Move on. Move on to what I'm sure we've all been waiting for, which is the election of a new chair. Just as a quick background, the statute that we all live and die with says, and I'm going to quote, "The panel annually shall select a chair or co-chairs and a vice chair for one-year terms, commencing with the first meeting following the effective date of this section," which is several years ago. Mary Gatzlick's and my terms, we were elected in November of '23, so our terms expired in November of '24. To elect a chair, we require a vote of the majority of the entire potential membership of the panel, which means that we need 11 votes. Do I hear any nominations?
Mr. Chair,
Excuse me?
I'd like to offer a motion. Nomination?
Well, okay. Do I hear any nominations? Mr. Gottlieb?
Yeah, without having asked him first, I'm going to, as I did last time, nominate Mr. Canty.
Second.
I would accept the nomination.
I second.
Second.
Who was that, please?
It's Pine.
Fine.
Thank you. Do I hear any other nominations?
I nominate Mary Jo Gatzlick as vice chair.
I'm only taking chair at the moment, Pine. These nominations for chair. Now, believe me, we'll be back to you in a second if I understood you correctly. Are there any other nominations for chair? In that case, I guess we will proceed to a vote for chair. All in favor of Mr. Canty being elected chair? I will start with Mr. Noyes.
I abstain.
Mr. Moylan?
Abstain.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Dubois?
Yes.
Mr. Fortini?
Yes.
Ms. Gatzlick?
Yes.
Mr. Canty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lampert?
Yes, to save you.
I will go home with you. Mr. Priest? Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Mr. Pickering?
Yes.
Mr. Bryant?
Yes.
Mr. Wade?
Abstain.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Yes.
Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
Dr. Potvin?
Yes.
And Ms. Menard is not here. Did I miss anyone? For myself, I will vote yes. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 votes in favor of Mr. Canty. We have a chairman. Congratulations, it's all yours. And now you can handle the vice chair. Give your mic.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Lampert, and thank you for your service. Ms. Dubois, did you have a nomination for the position of Vice Chair of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel?
Yes, sir. I'd like to nominate Mary Jo Gatzlick as vice chair, another term.
I second that.
Who is that?
Mary Waldron.
All right. Ms. Gatzlick, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Do we have any other nominations for the position of Vice Chair? Hearing and seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Once again, through the roll. Mr. Noyes?
Yes.
Mr. Moylan?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Dubois?
Yes.
Mr. Fortini?
Yes.
Ms. Gatzlick?
Yes.
Mr. Lampert? Yes. Ms. Lampert?
Abstain.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Mr. Pickering?
Yes.
Mr. Bryant?
Yes.
Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb? Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
Dr. Potvin?
Yes.
And Ms. Maynard is absent. So, and I will vote yes. So it is unanimous, save for one abstention. Ms. Gatzlick, congratulations on another term as Vice Chair of the Nuclear Decommissioning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
That brings us into the next item on the agenda, that being the annual report. Ms. Gatzlick, is this something you wanted to discuss?
Oh, absolutely not. We've already, in the last, that's just being facetious. In the last meeting, we already said we were going to use the exact same format we did before.
Yes.
Now we just have to find a volunteer to pull it all together.
Okay. Do we have any such volunteer to pull it all together?
Come on, guys, step up to the plate. I've done it twice.
Well, we seem to be lacking a volunteer. Ms. Gatzlick, is this something you could assist? You've done it in the past. I know asking you to do it again.
I will do it again, just because we're at the point where it's coming up to the March meeting, and we really should have had this report out last meeting, basically.
I'll volunteer to team up with you, Mary.
Okay,
At least
thank
to
you.
help with
I
edits and
appreciate
things
that,
like
Jack.
that.
Thank you, Mr. Priest. Appreciate that. All right. Anything else on the annual report before we move forward? Hearing and seeing none, that brings us to the last item on our agenda, that being a motion to adjourn, having concluded our business. Would anyone like to make such a motion? Mr. Gottlieb has moved, Ms.
excuse
Lampert
me.
has seconded. Any
Mr.
discussion about whether or not we should adjourn? Hearing and
I had-
seeing none? Mr. Noyes? How do you
Yes.
vote? Yes. Mr. Moylan?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien? Yes. Ms. Dubois?
I guess so. I was hoping for discussion on this agenda next time.
Yes.
Ms. Gatzlick?
Yes.
Mr. Lampert? Yes. Ms. Lampert?
Yes.
Mr. Priest?
Yes.
Mr. Pickering?
Yes.
Mr. Bryant? Yes. Mr. Wade?
Yes.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Mr. Gottlieb? Yes. Ms. Waldron?
Yes.
Dr. Potvin?
Yes.
And myself, yes, it is unanimous. We have adjourned for the evening. See everyone in March.